When World War II finally ended, the entire world breathed a sigh of relief. But the team that made it happen, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, well, that alliance was already starting to crumble. So how on earth did this incredible partnership fall apart so fast?
It's one of the biggest questions of the 20th century. How did this grand alliance, literally forged in the fire of a world war, just dissolve and lead to 50 years of a bitter global rivalry we call the Cold War? The answer, as you can probably guess, isn't simple. It's a real story of deep-seated mistrust, totally different goals, and a whole lot of broken promises.
So to really get why it all fell apart, you have to understand what the alliance was in the first place. And the truth is, it was never, ever built to last. It was a partnership with one and only one shared goal: beat Nazi Germany. Period.
This quote just nails it, right? I mean, think about it. This wasn't a friendship based on shared beliefs or some grand vision for the future. No way. This was a temporary, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of deal. Once that common enemy was gone, what was really left to hold it all together?
And this lays out just how deep that divide really was. On one side, you've got the USA, a capitalist democracy, all about free markets and lots of political parties. And on the other, the Soviet Union, a communist state where the government controlled everything and there was only one party in charge. These two systems weren't just different. They were fundamentally, completely opposed to each other.
So get this, even while they were fighting side by side, the very same mistrust that would later spark the Cold War was already bubbling up. The alliance was starting to show some serious cracks long before the victory parades ever started.
Okay, so two huge issues started causing friction. First up, the Second Front. Stalin was constantly pushing for the Allies to invade France to take some of the heat off his Red Army. The long delay made him really suspicious, like maybe the West was letting the Soviets do all the heavy lifting on purpose to weaken them for later. The second big problem? Eastern Europe. For Stalin, whose country had been invaded from the West twice, this was all about security. He absolutely wanted a buffer zone of friendly countries on his border. But for the West, it was about the principle of self-determination, that these nations should get to choose their own futures.
All this growing suspicion and these disagreements, well, they all came to a head at two incredibly important wartime conferences. These meetings were supposed to map out the post-war world, but instead, they pretty much drew the battle lines for the next global conflict.
First, in February 1945, you have the Yalta Conference. On the surface, everyone was still playing nice. They agreed to split up Germany, create the United Nations, and get the Soviets to help fight Japan. But the real sticking point, the key issue, was a promise of free elections in Eastern Europe. Now, to Roosevelt and Churchill, free meant real democracy with multiple parties. To Stalin, it meant you were free to choose any pro-Soviet communist government you wanted. They used the same words, but they meant completely different things. It was like papering over a giant crack in a day.
Just 5 months later at Potsdam, wow, the whole vibe had changed. For one, Germany was defeated, so the main reason for them to cooperate was gone. 2, the pragmatic Roosevelt had died and was replaced by Harry Truman, who was way more skeptical of Stalin. And 3, America now had the atomic bomb. The talks were openly hostile. They clashed over everything, from Germany's future to what the Soviets were doing in Poland. The partnership was, for all intents and purposes, dead.
And this right here is the result you could see on a map. Germany itself, and even its capital city, Berlin, got sliced up into 4 zones, controlled by the Soviets, the Americans, the British, and the French. Now, this wasn't supposed to be permanent, but it quickly became the most powerful physical symbol of a divided continent, and the very front line of the brand new Cold War.
So, the war's over, and the time for pretending to be friends is over too. What came next was a series of speeches and policies that basically made the split official, turning these former partners into openly declared rivals.
In 1946, Winston Churchill gives a speech that puts a name to this new reality. He wasn't the prime minister anymore, but his words hit like a thunderclap all around the world. The Iron Curtain became the defining metaphor for the Cold War, a stark, unforgettable image of a divided Europe.
And here you can see exactly what he meant. This map shows that invisible line, the Iron Curtain, snaking right down the middle of Europe, separating the Soviet-controlled countries in the East from the Western democracies. It wasn't just a line on a map, it was a wall of ideology, economics, and military power. The very next year, the United States made its stance official government policy. It was called the Truman Doctrine, and it was basically a global promise. America said it would support any nation trying to resist a communist takeover. And the key thing to get here is that this wasn't just rhetoric anymore. This was the official start of the American strategy of containment, a strategy that would shape U.S. foreign policy for the next 40-plus years. After the political move came the economic one, the Marshall Plan. The U.S. pumped billions and billions of dollars into rebuilding Western Europe. The thinking was, if these countries were stable and prosperous, they wouldn't fall for the promises of communism. Of course, the Soviet Union saw this as a direct attack. They called it economic imperialism, and they flat out forbade any of their Eastern European satellite states from taking the money. And just like that, you had a clear economic dividing line too.
So, as we see all these final pieces falling into place, it forces us to ask the big question. Was this breakdown unavoidable? And who, if anyone, is actually to blame for starting the Cold War?
By 1948, any last glimmer of hope for cooperation was gone. The Soviets blockaded West Berlin, trying to starve the city into submission. Germany was then officially split into two separate countries, East and West. And then the West formed NATO, a formal military alliance specifically designed to counter the Soviet Union. The Grand Alliance wasn't just fractured, it was history.
So who started it? Well, historians have been arguing about that for decades. The traditional view, what they call the Orthodox view, basically blames aggressive Soviet expansion. But later, revisionist historians flipped that, arguing it was actually American economic bullying that forced the split. But today, many historians lean towards a more complex idea, the post-revisionist view. It suggests that it wasn't really one side's fault. Instead, the Cold War was caused by mutual fear, by misperceptions, and by a deep-seated insecurity on both sides, where each country saw the defensive moves of the other as an aggressive threat.
When you strip everything else away, it really boils down to this one simple, powerful truth. The Grand Alliance was a temporary structure, built for one specific purpose. And when that purpose was achieved, when the common enemy was finally gone, the whole thing just couldn't stand on its own.
Which leaves us with this final thought. When you think about the clashing ideologies, the paranoia that was growing even during the war, could anything have stopped it? Could any leader or any treaty have kept these allies from turning into enemies? Or was the Cold War, in some shape or form, truly inevitable?